everything comes down to water. Everything comes down to water in the end, because if you don't have the water, you can't be here. Cheers. And what are the odds for somebody like me from the middle of nowhere and end up doing this? You know, how did that happen? Particularly when I go back to America, I find that urban existence where everybody runs around and works so hard, and none of them do this. And there's no place even nearby they can do this. The wilderness is over there under pressure. You have to book a place in with your caravan. On a trail, there'd be millions of people going by in the other direction. There's fingerboards and huts. And you can walk down off the mountain. There's a whole city at the bottom of the mountain and 3 or 4 cities ringed around you. Not out here. Yo, look at this. There's nothing. I used to always say that teaching is what I do and being an artist is who I am.
These are necessary up in the bush as far as I understand.
I was born in Managua, Nicaragua, on one of my dad's postings. And I've ended up out here. This is halfway around the world. And what were the odds? What was the likelihood of that happening? And out here I've discovered my internal landscape. And it's much more complex than that. Why did I end up in Australia? Well, because I traveled around the world with my father. I had this wanderlust, and I could imagine the Amazon, the Sahara. So when the job was offered here, you know, off I went. New South Wales Education Department came through, and they would hire anybody who was willing to go, and it didn't really matter how well you'd pass your university courses. They just wanted warm bodies. And the proviso was that you came and worked out bush. You could come work for 2 years and then fly you back to wherever you came from. It's sort of midday, and I think it was on a Sunday or something in late January, and it was blazing hot. It was something like 45 degrees. I remember coming out onto the platform of the train station on the Crystal Street side, and it just looked like an ocean of white light to the veranda on the other side, that little bit of shade underneath there. It was still the old Broken Hill. It was still the Broken Hill where union was dominant, and women weren't supposed to work after they got married, where everybody went to the pub. After the 2-year bit, I really wanted to learn how to paint, so I resigned and went down to Adelaide. I took an art course, the only art course I've ever failed. Went and one time at semester, looked in the window, and there was C. Barrett, 0. And it was at that point, after I was down in Adelaide, where I realized I'd made a mistake. I hadn't realized how much the bush had sort of gotten in under my skin and how much I loved it up here. When I was doing my starving artist routine, it wasn't that I wished I weren't an artist. I just wish that it was something that was more sustainable in human activity. You can make zillions of dollars ripping people off and scamming all sorts of things, but to actually pursue your art and to be able to survive on it financially is quite rare for most people. I think, look at the statistics. The average artist, makes maybe, if they're lucky, $20,000 a year, which is not particularly a sustainable income nowadays. So it's not so much that I wish I weren't an artist, I just wish that there was a way of doing it that allowed you to avoid many of the compromises that you do go through when you try to be the artist you want to be. If you're just going to pursue your vision, you tend to maybe not be something that a lot of other people relate to. And the irony is that we value in the history of art probably the artists who have pursued their vision, the Van Goghs who never sold anything in their lifetime or sold one. But it's also going to be something that's easy enough to simplify so I can get it done in the amount of time somebody's left me to do it. And so that there isn't too much information in there, so you have the best of both worlds where you can be painterly and not simply get bogged down by the details. There was a frustration that I couldn't paint, so in some ways I guess it's like the pop musician who wants to work with jazz artists. You want that recognition of being able that you're capable of those things, but certainly I rarely draw anymore, particularly, and I almost never do those sort of things anymore. I used to get in trouble for drawing in my maths book at school. I guess my parents were quite gracious. They gave me art lessons instead of punishing me. Used to enjoy doing cartoons when I was in high school that sort of wound up my mates, and probably the truest me in the truest sense. Like I know I respond to this, but you're getting my quirky humor and you got it because you were a mate. I used to illustrate letters to close friends too in those days, and I really value those now. And that's just my take, my view of the world. That was more, I guess, an expression of me with my friends and my mates, where this has become more of an expression, I guess, of some more deeper inner thing about, what does it mean to be alive in existence? Because that's why I come out here. I connect with that. When I'm not out here, I miss it. My original career was built on taking photos and going back. And there's a certain type of image you can get off of the photograph, and it's generally the close-up that works well in an image. But what actually happens is you lose that rhythm of the landscape. Everything flattens out. So I can look from side to side and I can see that panorama. And modern day cameras will stitch, but they still don't do anywhere near as good a job. That quite frequently I'll see something, I'll stitch or take 5 photos, and I think I'll stitch them together, and I do. I just wonder why when I get home. It's just gone. It's just not in there. So I've got to come out. I need to get to that point where I dial right down to 0, where I'm only living right here in the moment. You're so relaxed, and like I said, it allows my whole consciousness, if I'm listening to the wind and whatnot behind, it's not just in my head, but I actually merge with the landscape. You're on this ball spinning through space, but you look at it and you have this beautiful blue blanket on it. You have all these ecosystems doing this thing that we just, as humans, we basically ignore. We race around in our cities, and then all this stuff is happening out here, and you'd think, well, what would you do? You'd get bored. And then you get out here and you just discover that if you slow down to it, there's this incredible slow richness that unfolds every day. The day just unwraps itself like some sort of origami thing that's been rolled up in a tight ball, and then really slowly it opens and blossoms out. And I'm amazed. I'm amazed that my life has evolved to that, from being a guy who can only draw to being able to stand and do this. And when they work, it's, like I said, there's just this secret inside of me. It's like winning a grand final. You just go, yeah, that's wonderful. It's addicting in its own way. It becomes the thing you want to chase. Like right now. Be totally lost in it, totally absorbed in that. There's no other thing happening in my life, and yet there are other people in my life. There are other things happening, and I lose them. But there's a whole connoisseurship to opening up gates. The first thing you have to do when you arrive is you have to check which side of the post the hinges are on, because if they're not on the end that faces the latch, that means the gate will only open in one direction. And I've actually seen people come along, undo the latch, give it a mighty shove, and all it does is goes a little bit and then springs back and tosses them over as it trampolines back in the direction it will travel. The other thing I really like about them too is where people grab the curved part. You get them to where they've got this absolutely beautiful purple patina aware, all that lanolin off people's hands and skin oil just polishes it, and it's absolutely beautiful. It looks like some sort of opal on that bit, and then it goes back to the rusty sort of tin colors and oranges. Bull dust for some reason. I wonder why that is. The shearing quarters idea basically evolved over periods of time. Originally, I used to have just an old vehicle, and I'd go out and I'd lie on the ground, and the wind at night, if you had a night like this, would actually just blow all the grit in your face. So I actually worked at this whole trick where I'd park the car as a windbreak. I'd actually put the esky and then have the wheel and something else there, and I put my head up against that, and that way it would stop the wind hitting me. You also had to work out before you went to sleep which way the sun came up, because if it was at all warm, as soon as the sun came over the horizon, it'd absolutely fry you. So if I had like one small tree in the paddock, I'd actually lie with my head in underneath that. The thing I liked about once I started knowing enough property owners to ask them if I could use their quarters is I could do this without all that sort of inherent suffering and discipline that was required to do it. And it became a lot of fun. That's when the kids started coming along, and because it just became user-friendly enough that it was something that was enjoyable. But if you do, please come up and have a drink. But yep, if it gets too busy otherwise, another night. All right, thanks. Moodaroo, which is a huge old property from the late 1800s, and it has a series of huts on it that are organized to be about a day's walk with sheep or livestock. And they were set up in a way that they would lead down to the railhead so that they could transport the stock back. One of the huts has got a letter in it that they found that was written in 1939, where it's a young lad and he's talking about living with another guy in there. But he also talks about, in the letter to whoever he's writing to, he says, what do you reckon with this Mr. Chamberlain bloke? Do you reckon that he's gone a bit too far and given up too much to Mr. Hitler? Do you reckon we'll all live to regret that. And so it's an amazing timepiece. You can see where the old belt-driven shearing system was, and they're just these metal plates that left have been cut off, and now you got the new electric ones that come off an electric generator. And it's, like I said, the time capsules, where do you throw something away out bush? You don't. You just simply leave it, build the next bit on top of it. So when you look down here, you just have the lanolin, the blood in the floorboards. I was just admiring where on the blows as the shearing clipping piece comes across and the end bit stabbed into the wood here. And then you look at this next one, it's absolutely pockmarked. So there's this whole history. Well, even on these boards here, you just look at how encrusted is that. That's all lanolin. That's heated up during the summer in a 40-degree day. The red dirt stuck to it, and then it's all started to slip and slide, and then it's cooled down again, and it's all congealed in place. You have these great time capsules of all the graffiti of all the different people who worked out on the sheds, where they grabbed the stencils that would put the number and the name of the property on the side of the wool bales as they go out, and they grab the little black markers, and if you look up on the walls, they go right back. And they tend to go back in this hierarchy. You get the older ones are up at the top. So there's one that says 1977, Peter Moore. And then it works down as they've redone the wall, and you get newer ones. So the Francises own the next property over called Olena. And there's a C. Francis up there, and he's got musterer, where he's pieced together the letters. Now it comes down to the image, and the image that I want to do is right here. So it's much like the flies. There's always this thing. I could spend a week out and come back with maybe 4 or 5 images on canvas. And in a way you could say, well, what happened? What did you do the whole time you're out there? But it's a hand-to-hand combat with the elements, with the fact that the paint's cooking off on the brushes. I'm trying to do this. I'm not getting the ideal sort of mark that I would like. Fighting with the flies, and you just tuck the kangaroo in as part of that. There are times where it'd be nice that I didn't have to smell it, but you just become not necessarily immune to it, but it just becomes background noise. I find when the flies get really frenetic that they start to grind on me, and I wish there was some way of magically making them disappear. When I get out here, I become incredibly aware of my mortality, become really aware of what a gift it is to be alive on this planet when you think about all the inhospitable stuff that's out there. On the other side of that blue blanket, it's just the reason for being alive. There's something resonates, there's some connection deep inside of me that stirs. So driving along, coming over here to this location, there was just this sense of, yeah, this is what it's about, this is what you do. This is why I come out here. And there's a peace in it. I think we spend most of our lives sort of stressed and hassled, racing from one thing to another. There's certainly that sort of thing in most people's normal daily reality. And I get a chance to unhook from all of that when I come here and do this. So it allows me to do that. And this is just the absolute perfect weather. I come out and many times it's really hot, and like the flies are being really friendly today. And so there are aspects of it that's a bit trying. But at the same time, the whole experience taken as a whole thing is just fantastic. I think there's kind of a danger that I could be lost in all of this, that I'd just be really content to be out here doing this. But my family draws me back into town. I am worried that I will become some sort of hermit, that I actually have to put in an effort to be sociable, not for any dislike of other people. I just get so comfortable in my own space when I'm doing this that I have to force myself to go out and interact with people. I'd like the color to dance. I'd like my personality to be in it. I'd like the way that I work and the way I'm comfortable working. When all that comes together, and it's the ones where I dance, where that dance comes out, and as it unfolds, I manage the unfolding process really well. I recognize what it is doing, and I go with that conversation that it's having with me. It helps with that meditation thing because you realize you're insignificant. And that helps with all the stuff that you drag yourself down with at work, because you start realizing it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I don't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all insignificant. So the better job I do at realizing that, not happier, but just the more content, the less stressful my life will be. Look, you become totally lost in the moment, and it goes back to that ability to stand in one place. Everything. It's actually, I take that back. It's left brain, right brain. Part of my brain is really, really concentrating on that. The other part of my brain starts daydreaming. And so I guess that's another thing too. Rarely do we get in our lives a chance to think anyone thought through for hours and hours and hours. And while I'm standing out here, I get to do that too. So sometimes I sort of solve problems for myself in my head. I definitely, towards the end of it, some of the best painting I've ever done has been an absolute manic desire to have a cup of tea. And at the moment, there's so much detail out here and it's so late in the day that the light's just going to change really radically. So there's a need to just be as brief. And I start noticing lovely little patterns like in the saltbush, the way it cascades down, and then there's a bit of an earth tone through it in a way that helps you form the actual volume of the hill. The sheer fluke of who we are and existence, when you think of all the genetic combinations and permutations and possibilities. I've adopted in my own belief systems things from all of them, and I think I particularly like that sort of Buddhist idea about the middle way, and it's about finding peace within yourself. I had this lovely experience out at the property we're going to go to where I didn't have any music with me, so I just stood there, and while I was looking this way, the escarpment was behind me, and all day long I could hear the birds on the escarpment. I could hear the feral goats up there calling out to each other. So by the time I got back for lunch in the shearers' quarters, the visual image in my head was not of what I've been looking at. Even to this day, I have a hard time. It was a beautiful painting, but I can't actually remember looking down that valley. What I remember is I've actually in my head have this visual of the hill behind me, and that sort of woke me up to, there were other layers of appreciating the bush, not just what I was looking at, but just the sounds of it, the wind. I can hear the wind coming across the paddock, and even now there's a gust that's coming across me, and you can hear it out across the top of the bushes. You can hear the birds flit between the bushes. It's basically a dreamlike state, and it's what people are trying to achieve to a certain extent when they try to do the meditating stuff. So like I said, I had an epiphany when I was in India where I'd gone over there in theory to get that sort of peace, and realized with the intensity of the population over there and how hard it was to get around and whatnot, that I actually had it here. That when I was doing this, I went into that sort of perfect dreamlike trance state. Quite commonly would lose total track of time. I'd be amazed the sun is setting. It doesn't seem like anything's happened, but I've been standing there for 4 or 5 hours. My whole consciousness, if I'm listening to the wind and whatnot behind, it's not just in my head, but I actually merge with the landscape. I become at one with it. It's the ones where that dance comes out, and I don't necessarily have a preconception, but just as it unfolds, I manage the unfolding process. I recognize what it is doing, and I go with that conversation that it's having with me, and somehow it's unfolded from somewhere, and all I did was channel it. Those are the ones that work. I wasn't too sure what sort of image I had with my nose pressed up against it. So in the end, it has to be something that stands up on a wall or by itself, and it has to have its own logic and read its own way. So there's actually something to be said from getting away from the image that you actually started painting from, and just letting the thing stand on its own, let it go wherever it's going to go with its colors and patterns, and not slavishly just reproduce what's out there, because you tend to just go round in circles or get blinded by detail instead of the overall feel of the thing. The amazing thing about the top of the hill up here is the 360-degree panorama. I sort of realized that I'm drawn to this horizon line, and as I was pointing out to you, you had row after row of the hills just fading back, each one of them turning a different color, and there's just something metaphysical about being able to see that landscape all the way around. There's just no escaping this connection to the land, to the earth. The earth spins around, and you actually see that track, and it's rare that you stand in one place and you actually watch that light shift right across for the whole day and then go. It makes you really conscious of that. It makes you absolutely feel wonderful about being alive and in that moment and getting a chance to do it. Time stands still. It's just all about being here. It's all about being in this moment. Amazes me that a week goes by like that. I'll come in, stand in a shed like this, paint all day, suddenly become aware that the light's fading outside, and you literally think, God, where'd that day go? And yet you haven't done anything. You've just stood here and admired it. And then you put those days like that together and all of a sudden a week's gone. I think sometimes you get involved in the daily reality to the point where you sort of forget what the big picture is, what you really want to do. And then I come out to this and all this comes alive, and it comes alive so powerfully that it really drives me to want to do those images. I want to stand in here and I want to take these visions, tell these stories, and get them to come alive on this surface. And you get the one that absolutely sparkles and tells all those stories, and tells stories that you can't exactly put your finger on, but you just know what it's saying. There's a history of not just the places, but a history of experience. Somebody once reckoned it was like an onion. When you first get here, you just see the outside of the onion, and the more years you spend out on these properties, the more you peel away the layers. People might walk around dreaming of 5-star hotels or holidays or whatnot. This is what I dream of. It's who I am. It's what I do. It's in my soul.
Can I put on the record that I am not a roustabout?
No worries, and yeah, if you need a little bit more mutton.
How do you define being a human? How do you define being alive? This is it.